Welcome to the 2024 Phish Studies Conference Video Archive. The Mockingbird Foundation is thrilled and proud to present this groundbreaking video series on our YouTube channel. It continues our tradition of celebrating music education. Since 1996, we have been an all-volunteer nonprofit organization dedicated to broadening access to educational opportunities for youth in music and the musical arts. Please visit mbird.org to donate today.
Okay, we're going to get started. Thank you everyone for coming here early this morning. You guys are in for a real treat. We have 4 wonderful scholars up here talking about academic publishing and everything you want to know about how to do that with incorporating Phish or any sort of type of music, things that are not so mainstream, into the mix. So I'm going to introduce our panel. So first we have Jnan Blau. I want to raise her hand. Jnan is a better fan than even Trey is, and a scholar, and as a scholar works in the intersection of communication, performance studies, and critical cultural studies. He's published academically and non-academically on Phish, and is currently co-authoring a book on fandom with a Swiftie and a member of the BTS Army. Who do we have next? And next we have Natalie, and she's Oregon State University Cascades is where she works. She studies musical speech communities, communicating identity, and community dialogue. She has published articles on pedagogy of community dialogue, dispersed identity modeling, ethnographic approaches to group interaction, and jam band community identity. Thank you. Next we have the famous Stephanie Jenkins, we all know, is an associate professor. Yes, round of applause. Stephanie is an associate professor of philosophy in the School of History, Philosophy, and Religion right here at Oregon State University, and a volunteer director of the Mockingbird Foundation. In addition to publishing and editing in moral philosophy, she is co-editor of the Public Philosophy Journal, special issue devoted to Phish, and has taught a Phish and philosophy course at OSU since 2014. And finally, we have Oren Kroll-Zeldin. Oren Kroll-Zeldin is an assistant director of the SWIG, am I pronouncing that right? SWIG program in Jewish Studies and Social Justice, where he's also an assistant professor in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies. He is the co-editor with Ariel Worden-Greenfield of This Is Your Song Too, Phish and Contemporary Jewish Identity. Thank you guys for being here. So today we're going to start off and just having really a conversation that they're going to have, and I'm going to direct them with some questions. So I think really to get started, the first thing that we want to ask is, why are you guys having this panel? Why are you here today?
Thank you all for being here. The Phish Studies Conference is obviously a really important place for us to share scholarship about Phish, and many of us want to incorporate this into our professional lives in deep and meaningful ways. And those of us inside the academy know that publishing is pretty important for a lot of what we do. But I also think that if we're going to really be advancing the field of Phish studies and legitimizing Phish studies outside of those of us who are here and those of us who were here in 2019. We need to be publishing very widely, and we need to be legitimizing publishing in academic journals or books with academic presses. We need to have this be a legitimate part of our tenure and promotion profiles, and the only way to do that is if more and more and more of us are doing this publishing. So we're all in this together, and it is really an opportunity for us to think about how we have done our own publishing, what that's meant for us, and what that means for advancing the field of Phish studies more broadly.
I think I would add too that will mainly focus on Phish publishing and Phish-related scholarship, but I think woven into this will also be considerations and tips for kind of what it means to navigate the tenure track process, or, you know, for being, if you're a younger scholar, what kind of things to anticipate or think about, or kind of tips and strategies, so to speak.
Thank you. So why don't we begin with just each of you going through a brief overview of the projects that you've been involved in that include Phish Studies.
I think, like many of us, I'm very indebted to Dr. Stephanie Jenkins and her vision for what Phish Studies could look like. I remember I was not at the Gorge in 2018, but I learned about the Phish Studies Colloquium, and I sent all my friends who were at the Gorge, you have to be there, find it, whatever it takes, find it and report back. And after that, I had a conversation with Stephanie. I was like, wait, what exactly are you doing? What do you mean, Phish? Like, you could really do scholarship on Phish and that would be okay? And I was excited about that because since I was an undergrad traveling around seeing Phish, it was like, I want to do a project about Phish and Judaism someday because I'm thinking about that a lot. Well, after that colloquium, had a conversation with Stephanie, and then they organized the first Phish Studies conference, and I put together a panel called The People of the Helping Friendly Book, and there were four papers presented at that conference about various aspects of Phish and Jewish identity. From that, I spent 5 years working to edit this volume. This is Your Song Too, Phish and Contemporary Jewish Identity, published by Penn State University Press. And to the best of my knowledge, and maybe someone correct me, I think this is the first academic book with an academic publisher about Phish. There will be others, and we'll hear about that. And it truly all came out of this conference. And what I have been learning in the few months that this book came out, by the way, I should say there are 4 contributors to this book who are here at this conference. I only see one of them in the room now. Noah is here. I'm gonna have to talk to the other 2 about why they're not here. That's a conversation for later. But again, I just want to point to the significance of this conference as a place to think about scholarship with Phish that could lead to very significant and meaningful publications. And what I have been learning in the few months since this book came out, maybe half a year since this book came out, is that it has had an impact both on Phish fans, on non-Phish fans, like the family members or friends of Phish fans who are like, what is this whole thing that you've been doing? But it also has started to make an impact on Jewish studies scholarship. Someone just finished a master's thesis about Jewish spirituality and surfing, and they're citing this book as a way of how people can find meaningful spiritual experiences outside the confines of what traditional Jewish life might look like, a Phish concert, surfing. And so this type of publishing really, really is impactful and significant.
Hi, my name is Natalie Dollar. I think we were introduced, so sorry about that. I will just speak a little bit about a project that I'm working on with Stephanie, but I am going to defer and let her talk mostly about it because she is the editor. I have the pleasure, myself and Dana Reason, who was a music professor here at Oregon State, was going to be on the panel, but she is ill today with COVID and couldn't join us, and I just want to give her a shout out because she brings something it reminds me, we all come from different fields. My field is communication, Stephanie is philosophy, and Dana is music, composing. She's a improvisational pianist, and she is really, did a lot of work to get the Prax Center built over here and that sort of thing. But it brings together, you have three people from such diverse fields that don't even really know. I know Stephanie, but I didn't know Dana, and began working with her. And I've been at this for a while. I went to grad school in the 80s, and I wrote my master's thesis on Deadheads in 1987. And my career, I've been at Oregon State for 30 years, and I decided I was going to continue publishing on Deadheads and musical speech communities, and then Phish. And I had a lot of people tell me not to do that I was ruining my career, that I would never get published, and that it was just a death sentence. And I just stayed true to it. I really felt like the more that I got into the studies, like with Phish, there's so many people coming at it from so many different angles that is just overwhelmingly interesting and insightful. And I find that it leads me to other conversations with people in other fields. And we all of a sudden are talking about similar things in different language. And it's just a good experience. But I want to also say that, yes, the publishing is a huge part. And I was honored that Stephanie asked me to help co-edit our upcoming book that is from the proceedings from the conference in 2019. And look forward to introducing that to you all. And again, I just do want to say that with the publishing, one of the things that you do want to do is you really want to go for journals that are meaningful, that will help you get your tenure. And I think it's advantageous to work with some people that you know that can help guide you through that process. But don't get discouraged. That's my main thing. Don't get discouraged. Keep at it. What you're doing is really worthwhile and meaningful. And, good scholarship doesn't come easy. And some of the most brilliant scholarship is scholarship that's been turned down and pushed away for years, and people just believed in it. And so I think that's part of what we're doing with Phish Studies as well. So thank you.
Yes, hi. So a brief overview of the projects I've been involved with. I've published academically and non-academically about Phish. I've got a few things on headcount.org, which I'm sure a few of you are familiar with, got approached early on for that. But so here's my main academic publications that I think are relevant. I'm going to mention one that is also not Phish specific, but there's a lot of lessons I learned from that I think could be relevant and helpful here. Excuse me. So I wrote my doctoral dissertation. My degree is in communication studies. My areas of emphasis are performance studies primarily, critical cultural studies more broadly, and also intercultural communication. And I dared to write a dissertation on Phish, which was a whole process, and we can talk about that another time. But out of that dissertation, I have so far published two things. One was in an international ethnomusicology journal. So I tried, in writing about Phish and deciding to write about Phish, I had to kind of school myself on things that weren't part of my particular program of study. Popular music studies as a whole interdisciplinary area. I dabbled in ethnomusicology because that seemed relevant and helpful, especially to try to understand improvisation and what had been written about improvisation. So yes, I published an article in the ethnomusicology journal called Transcultural Music Review, and it was a special issue. I was lucky enough that performance studies, my specialty, which is not exclusive to communication studies, but very much housed there, at that time, the kind of mid-aughts, was very kind of in and in vogue as this theoretical framework and lens. And so that was part of a special special issue on music and performance studies. And then the other piece that I published was published in a journal called Cultural Studies, Critical Methodologies, published by Sage. Also a special issue on music and performance studies from a different perspective, in which I talk about Phish as putting into evidence 5 commitments in the work that they do on stage, and that those commitments become cultural values off stage in a nutshell. And then I've published a co-edited book not unlike that one, but not on Phish. It's called Performance on Behalf of the Environment, published by Lexington Press, which is an imprint of, I think it's Rutledge, under Rutledge. And I'll say more about that book project in a little bit, mainly because of, like I said, some of the things that I learned in doing that process and kind of how we got there, starting at a conference, similar to what happened with you, Oren. And I'm currently working, as Denise mentioned, on a book project. This will be another thing that I'm going to pull out of my dissertation. The dissertation's old now, but I still believe in it. There's still good stuff in it. And it's going to be a book on fandom and this thing that I call the three deeps. I'm going to save that for now, but working with it. Initially, I was going to do it by myself, but then I have a good colleague that I went to grad school with, who is a giant music fan, nerd like us, and has become a giant Swiftie in the last couple of years. He's published academically on Bob Dylan already, and now his book on Taylor Swift, which I think is going to be the first academic book on Taylor Swift, is in press right now. He's almost done with manuscript revisions. And then he gave me the idea of bringing on a third author who was actually a student of mine in grad school a long time ago, but she's now up in Washington at a community college, and she's a giant BTS Army member, if you all know K-pop and that whole side of things. And so we're really enjoying that conversation and what's going to be coming out of that. So I think that's all I'll say in terms of what I've been involved with so far.
Before I get into my projects, I just want to say thank you to Natalie Dollar for paving the way here at OSU for Phish Studies Scholarship. I never would have done anything that I have done here without her leadership. She showed me that it's possible to do Grateful Dead Studies Scholarship and to teach a class on the Grateful Dead at OSU, and that's how all of this got started. There's a couple main projects that I've been working on in terms of publishing. The first one is the Public Philosophy Journal that's devoted to Phish and philosophy that was published in 2022. It's a collection of 7 essays devoted to all topics on Phish and philosophy. It was co-edited with Mockingbird Foundation director Charlie Dirksen. And the reason why that was done was because I specifically wanted to have someone who was outside of academia, but who had a background in philosophy. Charlie majored in philosophy in college, and so he brought a lot to the table, but also had an outside of academia perspective. The second project is the Concepts We'll Ponder edited collection that comes out of the 2019 conference. That's going to have approximately 15 essays that are multidisciplinary. It's going to be published through Rowman and Littlefield. The Lexington series in For the Record, working with Dana and Natalie on that. One thing that I want to say about that in particular is that part of the reason why we brought Dana Reason onto the project is that she specializes in improvisation, but she's not a Phish fan. And basically, we have this idea that Phish Studies Scholarship will have made it when people who aren't Phish fans start doing Phish Studies Scholarship. And so Dana brings in this other perspective that is different from a Phish fan, and she's a check on our fandom. And so this is a really important addition to the project that we can talk about maybe a little bit later in terms of some of the challenges of being fan scholars.
I just want to add something to that, which is in the afterword to this book, which was written by Dean Budnick. He says exactly that. He reads through the book, and one of the conclusions he comes to is Phish Studies is on its way, but it really only will have arrived when it's non-fans who are taking Phish seriously as a subject of study. And I think we're on our way.
Thank you. So moving on, a question that I'm sure people have is, we are an interdisciplinary field, so how do you combine both your fields of study and Phish Studies in a way that really is promoting Phish Studies, because we want this scholarship to develop? So how have you done that in your articles or publishing?
I'll take a step by going first. One of the things I'll say for now, and probably will say more later, is that it's key for us all to think about the fact that we're not just, and this has helped me understand my work and talk to others about my work with Phish, like really? You're writing on fish? Like, what the hell? Like, how does that make sense academically? Is that we're not just writing about fish. So I often talk about my work as fish is a great case study in how to talk about and argue for the power of pop culture, broadly speaking, in people's lives. Or more specifically, the power of live music as a thing that's really meaningful and important and impactful and part of people's identities and senses of purpose and literally how to live their life, right? So, and then there's live music more specifically, and more specifically within that, live improvised music, right? So Phish is the case study that allows us to make arguments and advance understandings about things that aren't really well understood, which is entertainment or music or fish aren't just fish or just entertainment. These are deeply meaningful, impactful things in people's lives and have a lot to reveal to us. So I think that's really important to keep in mind throughout all of this.
I would echo what Jnan said. My piece that is in the edited book is an example, I think, of part of this process, which is, you know, what are the theories, what are the interesting conversations that are being had in your discipline, and, you know, does Phish connect in that way? And as a case study, it is an excellent way to use it. I use it to teach, I use it to write, but a concept for me that's been very important since my early days of scholarship with the Deadheads is what I call dispersed communities. They're called other things, but generally the idea, and now it's just such a familiar thing, but, you know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we didn't talk about them as much, but a dispersed community to me is a community that doesn't share a home landscape. They don't share a physical landscape, but they gather at other places. So, and we transition to these identities from our other identities. So, like I'm working on an identity transition model where, and we do this as academics, you know, we leave our school and we go to these conferences and we transition to a type of identity and then we transition back. People work abroad and never meet people in their offices anymore, these sorts of things. And so what I'm very interested in is that process, and especially when we go from a very localized identity that's grounded in a place to meet people that we share an identity with, but we really share more space than place with them. And how do we do that transition? What do we leave behind? What do we remember? And so that's the kind of stuff I look at, is the communication and how it becomes a part of our identity and how we make choices about when to present as that identity and when we choose to hold back on that identity as well, because there's a conundrum there. It's a stigma attached a lot of times. So there's some fancy footwork happening there. And again, my point is just that, you know, the things that are being studied in your field and the conversations that you're interested in, you know, those are the places when Phish becomes meaningful in those conversations, then you are accomplishing what we're talking about up here, where other people are starting to study Phish besides people who like Phish. And that's one way to do it. Thank you.
Phish Studies is growing. The body of literature is growing, which means there's a lot more material that can be published, and it shows the legitimacy of Phish Studies. And so if we continue to cite one another and continue the scholarly conversation, that is one way to establish the field in your work.
I'll just say that this book that I co-edited is multidisciplinary, and in a sense it's a microcosm for what Phish Studies can be, or what it already is. Anthropology, religious studies, Jewish studies, musicology, American studies, few other things are represented of disciplines in this book. And I mean, Phish takes form and structure and tears it all apart and then builds it back together. It goes across all kinds of lines, and that's what I think we want to be doing, we ought to be doing with this scholarship, legitimizing it not only in performance studies and communication studies and philosophy and religious studies, but make it transdisciplinary and not only multidisciplinary.
Great answers. Thank you all for that. Moving on, I think that a lot of people probably have some questions in general about publishing and a question about, how do you find a publisher and get a contract? I guess specifically through, the fields that you're trying to promote, Phish Studies, but I guess more generally as well, how do you find a publisher?
So the Public Philosophy Journal had a very specific pipeline project for publishing. I applied to attend a workshop that was for public philosophy projects in general, and then later pitched a special issue to the editors. They were already familiar with my work and with Phish and were highly curious about what a special issue about Phish would look like. And so I kind of had my foot in the door with them already. And that's how that project developed. With the special issue for the edited collection coming out of the 2019 conference, I was at a national philosophy conference and spoke to a number of publishers about the potential project. Lexington seemed to be the most interested, and I stayed in touch with the representative over a period of time until we submitted the book proposal. And we initially submitted it through the philosophy pipeline because that was who the representative was that I was in contact with. They moved us to the For the Record series because that seemed to be a more appropriate outlet for the project, and we ultimately agreed with them, and it was accepted.
Finding an academic publisher for a book it's a tricky thing, because there's two sides to it. It's what's good for the publisher and what can the publisher do for you, and what's good for you and for the project and what can you do for the publisher. When we put together a pretty comprehensive book proposal that some presses laughed at us. They're like, yeah, right, Phish, good joke. And that was totally fine because that was not the right press for this book. None of those were the right presses for this book. And we knew that this was a book worthy of being published, so we eventually had a few different publishers who were interested in the project. So, you have to put together a proposal we don't need to do that. Oh, you'll talk about that. Okay. So we had the book proposal, and then we sort of narrowed it down to these two presses and looked at what would be the product that they would produce. How much would that book cost? Some academic publishers are only doing hardbacks, and they're going to cost $95, and it's not going to be accessible to anyone anywhere. So we firmly believe in the value of public scholarship that should be accessible and available. And Penn State University Press was able to say, this is what our vision is for what this book could be. Here's how we would price it, not at $95. We have a graphics design team that is award-winning, and they will make a really beautiful product. I mean, it's weird to talk about it as a product, but for a publisher, that's what this is. And I think they succeeded. It's a very, very beautiful book. And that was a really, really important consideration for us. What would they be able to do? But I also think that some academic publishers will be better than others in helping you to market the book. And that is also a very real thing. I don't want to go too deep into that and being recorded and all this, but it's very, very important to think about how will the press themselves help you to market the book, to get it in front of audiences, or to get you in front of audiences, or to have snippets of the book published in various places to make it so that people know about the book.
Yeah, I'll talk about the process with the co-edited volume that I published with Lexington as well. That wasn't on Phish. It's a book called Performance and on Behalf of the Environment, and it's because I think one way that we can help here is kind of demystify this process or find ways to kind of get there. Sometimes that feels like it's big and insurmountable. The way that one worked for me and my co-editor, it started off, he was a colleague of mine. He's no longer at my institution at California Polytechnic down in San Luis Obispo. I'm a performance studies scholar. He's an environmental communications scholar. Communication studies is a broad umbrella and lots of different subspecialties under that. And we realized, why don't we intersect these two? And which is always a good thing to do. Find someone to collaborate with, bring two fields together, or even within your own field, two different kind of areas of the field. Let's put these into conversation with each other. So what do environmental communication scholars, what can they learn from performance and vice versa, right? And so the way we played this, and it's not unlike what happened with your project, Oren, we started off with a panel at our main umbrella academic conference, is the National Communication Association, which meets every year in November. So we started with a panel at that conference and invited people that we thought would make sense for this, people that we knew. So it was 5 or 6 of us. And we figured that we can turn into chapters for the book, which is exactly what happened for you, plus you added some more. So it's 4 or 5 of us, and our paper that we co-wrote together could turn into the intro for this book. And so by the end of that conference, we had 4 chapters more or less ready to go and authors identified, plus a good sense of how to kind of talk about this and talk about it, introduce and frame the book itself. And then we put out a wider call and filled out the rest of the book. And so it kind of, each step of the way gave us materials that then become part of the book prospectus and the index and so forth. And so it kind of fleshed it out for us. So you start off relatively small and just keep growing and it turns into a book, right? Which is exactly what happened for you. So that's one way to get to, or to demystify ending up with something as beautiful as that, is there are small steps along the way that help you get there. And if you're strategic in those kinds of ways, it works really well and fairly easily. While I'm here, I'll say a few things about kind of publishing more generally, or once you get into this, and Oren, any of us can probably speak to this. Some of the things that I didn't know going into this were like indexing a book. I don't know if you had to deal with that. It seems silly and nerdy, but this is academia, right? Indexing a book is a whole thing, and you can pay people to do it, or the different presses will handle it for you, or not at all, or not well. We ended up deciding to index our own book because I find indexes incredibly useful, right? And I think something for us to consider as Phish scholars and Phish fans, right? You want to find out if a particular Phish song or lyric is mentioned. There's so many things to index within Phish scholarship. Like, keep that in mind and track that, or write down keywords as you're working on the project all the way through, because putting together some indexes are really short and marginally useful. A really fully developed index is super useful to readers of the book. So like, track that, keep that in mind ahead of time. We had to do it kind of about the 11th hour when most of the book was done, and we realized, like, shit, we're gonna have to, pardon the language, we're gonna have to do this ourselves, and relatively quickly, and it was a heavy lift. I will also note, I think we probably all understand this to some extent, but I'm such a believer in harnessing student energy. So if you have graduate students, I don't, but or undergraduates, they are generally so earnest and full of energy. So can you help me with research? Even if you don't have a fully developed kind of research assistance program, I pitched it to students who I've seen, like, you would fit the bill for this. You're smart, you're hardworking, so on and so forth. Would you be interested in helping me do some research, collate some stuff? And generally they're happy to. It goes on their resume. It's something they can talk about. So I've said, like, I can't pay you, but you will get something out of this in terms of resume building and so forth. So that's a few things I'll say for now about my experience publishing.
I'd just like to add to that a couple of things. One is network. You know, that is why we are here. And don't be afraid to go up and talk to someone about their project or share what you're working on with other people. Doing so is very hard, I know, for some people to reach out, but that's where you're going to get your connections. That's where you're going to get your support, and those people may end up publishing with you. As people have been talking about on the panel, you know, it is these connections that we end up publishing with. And another piece of advice I'll give you that I did not follow is publish out of your dissertation. I was so sick of mine when I finished it, you know, but it wasn't on a fun subject, you know. I studied a sorority. I know that sounds crazy, but communication and identity, and believe it or not, I was in a sorority down in Mississippi. If anybody that knows me now can't believe that, right? Yeah, very strange. But yeah, so I did not publish out of my dissertation. I put it in a closet, locked it away, and never wanted to touch it again. Don't do that. Even if you don't like it, you worked so hard on it, publish it. Something is in there, probably in that material, and that is probably a mistake that I have made throughout my career a couple times, is not submitting enough. And I tell you what, when you start getting asked to be a reviewer for a journal, you start seeing the diverse quality and ways of approaching manuscripts that you never thought existed, and you gain confidence. You're all of a sudden going, well, I can do this. I can submit that. So yeah, I'm not so bad, you know, and so do that. Submit out of your master's thesis, your PhD, dissertation, submit, and then just the ideas that you have. Take them, put them out there, and let people respond to them. You generally are going to get some good feedback from it. You also going to get some jerks sometimes. I remember that the reason I quit sending stuff out for a while was I had someone tell me that in a review I knew absolutely nothing about ethnography of communication, and that's what my dissertation was on, and that kind of destroyed me, and I went in a little hole and didn't dig myself out for a while, and come to find out that person did not know anything about my field, you know, but I didn't know that, and I was young, and I took that and I took my stuff and I went back to my little room, and I didn't come out for a while, and I wouldn't advise that for anyone, because when you do start getting a feel for it, you get in a rhythm, you get in a flow. All right, yeah. Thank you.
I'll add something real quickly to that, which is in the process of getting a manuscript ready, whether it's for a journal publication or a book publication, you already have a network in us. So for example, Oren approached me to be the manuscript reviewer of that whole book. So I had the great pleasure and honor of reading the whole thing ahead of time, and then working with the publisher and telling them, and it was a pretty extensive process, and I was happy to do it, of what I saw in the book, strengths, weaknesses, things to address, so on and so forth, and mostly it was pretty good to go already. And I think wrote the blurb, which I don't think they used in the end, or it doesn't matter, right? But all I'm getting at is there are those of us here who have been through this process, and we can use some of our own legitimacy by being tenured professors at our institutions, right? And that's often what publishers need to see, is there's someone else who can say, like, yeah, it's like vouching for the project, giving it a stamp of approval. Someone who's an established scholar, then they go, okay, this might be more for real than we realize, if there might be a little bit on the fence of that. So we are here to, I think, a good deal, help each other out, right? So don't be shy to approach any of us about, would you read a manuscript, or could you review the whole thing for a press, or, you know, put in a good word, so to speak. And there's different ways and mechanisms in where that works, ways that work.
Great, thank you so much. And I think that, you know, Natalie started talking a little bit about peer review and the obstacles around that. Can you, the rest of you, talk a little bit more about passing peer review or being a peer reviewer within this discipline?
I have not reviewed anything yet in Phish Studies, but I do know that the major obstacle towards publication is passing peer review. And we're not all so lucky to have Jnan be the peer reviewer for our projects. And I think that what Jnan said is that we are all here for each other as resources to improve our projects, to be real critical readers, to help get them to a place where they will pass peer review. If you don't pass peer review for one publication, try a different publication and then a different one after that. If it's a journal, try to approach different presses for books. I think that persistence is essential. The peer review process can be very, very scary. Rigor is essential. I think that for Phish Studies, we need to be producing very rigorous, serious scholarship to be legitimized in a different way, and rigor is the place that will get us there, and rigor will help us pass peer review.
I can answer this question from a different perspective as someone who organized the peer review process for the Public Philosophy Journal. First of all, we had 4 criteria that we used. Accessibility, meaning that the work had to connect with the public at large and avoid jargon. Second, relevance, meaning that it had to be timely and responsive to the needs of the community that it was addressing, the Phish community. Third, intellectual coherence. There had to be a good argument. And finally, scholarly dialogue, meaning that the work had to address the relevant literature for the argument and Phish Studies at large. All of the essays, all 7 of them, went through 3 peer reviews, which is unusual. Usually it's just 2. Each essay was read by a Phish Studies scholar, a non-Phish Studies scholar, and a fan. The reason why we did this is we wanted to make sure that the essays were relevant to Phish Studies as a field, but also that they would be relevant outside of the field of Phish Studies. But then we wanted to make sure that the essays were relevant to the fan community, and especially that they were accessible to the fan community. So they were highly, highly and rigorously analyzed. When you are getting a bunch of reviews back as an author, it can feel unmanageable to go through that much amount of material. The best way to go about doing it is to take the feedback with a grain of salt and go through it one piece at a time and work with your editors. Just because someone has given you a point of change that they want you to make in your essay doesn't mean you have to make it, right? That's something that you can work out with your editors. So take it from that perspective. When you are a peer reviewer, please be kind and generous with your interpretation of the essay, and always take it from the perspective of the author. What is the author trying to do with their essay, not what you want them to be doing with the essay.
That's fantastic advice that Stephanie just gave on the process. And I was fortunate to be asked to be a peer reviewer in the Public Philosophy. And I just want to say, check out that journal, because the entire process that they developed is a mentoring process. It is a great way to learn about publishing, and the way we went back and forth and talking with the writers and the submitters and stuff. It is a real model out there that I never knew existed with anything in academia. And it was very friendly, and it was helpful, and I think all the reviewers were very mindful. We've all been through this process. We know how terrible it can make us feel. So it was with much intent that we used some kindness in there. The other thing I would like to say about, peer reviewing and thinking where you're going to submit, look at the conversations they're having. I mean, there's some journals that are just obviously appropriate and others that are not. And that's the first step, is find where they're having these conversations that you want to be part of and target those journals. And it's good advice to get out there and to talk to people at the journal. Ask to, you can talk to reviewers and stuff if you ask. I didn't know any of this kind of stuff, but you can get in touch with them and ask them to talk with you about it. So I would say, just that background work is really important. And if you know someone that's published with them before, talk to them. That's really helpful. And most people are willing to share in our world. We are fortunate because we are a sharing community and we like to partner. There are academic fields that this would be terrible advice. So if you're in that field, don't take my advice, okay?
A thought that occurs to me as well is if you're a way to kind of open up space for yourself on your work or our work more generally is to think creatively about special issues. I don't know how common this is across disciplines, but at least in the disciplines or the mix of disciplines that I play around in, they're fairly common. So one way to kind of open up space for yourself is if you can collaborate with someone either from a different discipline or same discipline but different topic, right? And you can come up with a proposal for a special issue. Often journals are very receptive to this. And so once you frame a special issue around something and then have a collection of essays kind of ready to go, along with usually a wider call for papers to round out the issue, that's one way you can get your particular scholarship or your particular manuscript, create a space for it, rather than kind of dropping a quote-unquote random article on Phish into some journal that has nothing to do with Phish, right? So you can think creatively about how to open those spaces for yourselves in those ways.
Thank you so much for that useful information. I think that we should, before we take questions, one last question I think that everybody would benefit from is just in general obstacles that you have encountered and how you've gotten through them within this whole process, or even as educators kind of bringing this into the field.
I have been successful at using my classroom to do so. And like Stephanie teaching a course on Phish, I teach a course on the Grateful Dead. And I make these little stickers, as you guys can see, and I give my students these little stickers every year. They love getting them because it says the class name and it's a steal your face with the Benny Beaver on it. And in that class, one of the things that I do is I network, and I have probably 7 guests, other Grateful Dead scholars, and they Zoom in and talk with the students about it, and they get a sticker, so they share the sticker. But the classroom is a wonderful place to introduce your material, to get people interested in it. And I'm often shocked at the students that take the deepest dive, because in this class they study the other fan communities that they want to be part of. They do super cool stuff. Like now they submit a playlist with their papers. So I'm listening to these other bands as I read their papers, and it's quite interesting. But I don't have graduate students either. So I find students in my class, and oftentimes it is someone in biology that is really smart and interested in something. So I use the classroom as a way to kind of get out there and share and get interest in the topics. And then, all of a sudden the faculty start noticing it, and they're like, oh, wow, that's cool, and I was able to get my program the sponsor over here for the conference. And that kind of support, it just comes from the ground up and, working with the people that you trust.
I am going to share something that happened to me. It's both comedic and also deeply problematic. And things have gotten better early in the tenure track process for me, that 6-year process. So when I first started, I was starting to publish the 2 articles on Phish that ended up happening in academic journals. And my reviewers, my colleagues who are now retired, I'm going to keep some comments to myself. With largely good intentions, but still, this is the problematic part. Like in the year 1, 2, maybe year 3, you get reviewed every year in terms of how you're doing, making progress towards tenure. They said, okay, great, like good for you with these publications, which they really didn't read or understand, but they were supportive enough. But they did encourage me, and this was ostensibly well-meaning feedback or part of the review, but ultimately deeply problematic, is, hey, I'm paraphrasing, but they said, could you maybe stop publishing on Phish, or at least not have Phish in the title? Right? Which assumed that, like, okay, now can you do some more like real or legitimate scholarship? And so there is that misconception. There's a misconception in academia in general. It's been getting better and better. Early 90s, fandom studies became a thing. And you were early, like, involved in some of the early work there, right? Where, like, to study pop culture at all, broadly speaking, was not seen as legitimate focus for academic work. We've done a lot of work broadly in academia, especially in the liberal arts or humanities, to realize, like, yeah, entertainment and popular culture, whether it's TV, fandom, film, music, there's a lot going on there that can be unpacked and studied. So but we face this, and I think this articulates to or connects to a broader problem that Phish fans face in general, where there's all these misconceptions about Phish as a band, Phish fan culture, and they think they've got us figured out. And this happens in the broader culture, right? Stereotypical portrayals on skits on SNL, or it's rampant. It's all over the place, and this shows up in academia as well. So that's something to keep in mind and anticipate to some extent. There's a lot of scholarship on popular culture, broadly speaking, on fandom and so forth, that can help you make the case that, like, it's about way more than you realize or understand if you give it even half a shot, right? And I would emphasize again, if people are like, really, you're going to write about Phish? The way around that to some extent is what I said earlier. Like, yes, I'm writing about Phish, but this is really about so much more than that. Or Phish is just a way to get to broader cultural, philosophical, theoretical, conceptual implications, or work, right? So you sometimes have to help people understand, and this can be your own reviewers in your own department on your way to tenure, that this is not random, cute scholarship. And one of the things that drove me nuts about that then is, like, you wouldn't tell a Shostakovich scholar to, can you take it easy on the Shostakovich, right? So there's this perception that Phish is not weighty and legitimate, whereas other more classically established, and I use the word on purpose here, musical outfits or, other areas in the entertainment or pop culture realm, that somehow, and we can get into a high culture, low culture, and the ideologies embedded in all of that. So there's a lot to work through, and honestly, I'd be happy to talk through any of this with you at some other point too. There's some really good early scholarship that helps legitimize work like this that doesn't seem legitimate on the face of it.
So this might seem like a small, trivial detail, but it's actually an enormous pain to deal with, which is that there is no universal way for citing song lyrics. With our text, we are using Chicago Manual of Style format, and our publisher is requiring us to treat song lyrics like every regular quotation throughout the textbook. And so we went to the Chicago Manual of Style to look up the format for citing song lyrics, and there's pretty much every other musical citation practice listed, but there's no format listed for song lyrics. So not quite knowing what to do, we went to our research librarian, and our research librarian didn't know what to do, asked another librarian, that librarian didn't know what to do, so they went to the actual Chicago Manual of Style office. They didn't know what to do and escalated to their editorial office, and they got back to us and said, actually, there's no set standard for how to cite song lyrics. Here are a variety of different ways that you could do it. Just pick one and be consistent, and that's all that matters. And so then we just had to go through and figure out, okay, what information is relevant for us what do we want to have in a citation, and how are we going to decide to go forward doing it. So it was actually kind of a fun process and a rather curious one to go through. And thanks to Oren for some help and guidance in that process, because he went through it before us, and Ariel as well. But did you want to add something to that?
I also wanted to talk about lyrics. So consistency was the key. That was one of the major obstacles also that we faced, and we just had to be consistent. And actually, in reviewing the book, we were not fully consistent. I realized a couple places, so don't tell the editors. Don't tell the readers either. But we used so many lyrics in this book, and we actually worked with the band's management on trying to get permission for all of the lyrics, because we didn't know how to navigate the process with the lyrics. Because in some points we're using 3 or 4 words. Do we need permission if we're just saying surrender to the flow? What if we're citing 3 lines of a song? Then do we need the permission? Because the book was going to be sold and someone was going to be making money off of it. So that was a major, major obstacle that we ended up just going to Red Light Management and speaking with them and working with them on the process.
Thank you guys so much for that. I think that unless there's anything else you want to add, we could have some time for questions. So if anybody has any questions, they could just come up here to the mic, please. One of these mics. I think that they're on.
Hey, thank you. That's been wonderful. This, I guess, piggybacks a little bit off that last point you were just making. But I wonder if there are, I wonder what the, when I look at positive ways in which this has happened with other disciplines, like I think about the Grateful Dead, right? The Grateful Dead Studies is a thing. They've had some of the same obstacles, but there's like a Duke University Press like series in the Grateful Dead, right? And I wonder if some of that is because of the positive engagement of band members contributing to archives and generally being cool with it, contrasted with like Frank Zappa's studies has lagged because the estate of Frank Zappa has been really reluctant to grant any permissions whatsoever. Where do you see Phish falling in that? How engaged is the band with this?
The band knows that this is happening. They know about the scholarship. They know about this conference. On Mike Gordon's hotline, he has spoken about it. We interviewed Mike Gordon for the book and talked to him kind of at length about this. And he thought it was just fascinating that this is all happening. I think that there will be a time when Kevin Shapiro gets involved in archiving stuff and helping with scholarship. I don't think it's there yet. But I think that the band will be involved and they care. They find this fascinating, and I don't think will be an obstacle in advancing the field. But I only know this from very brief conversation with Mike Gordon about that.
Cool.
I can speak a little bit to the dead part of it. And as many of you probably know, there's an archive at UC Santa Cruz, Grateful Dead archive, and that was years and years in the works. And it came down to where the band wanted their archives. There were a number of universities that wanted it, so it was a matter of working with the band particularly to get the things donated there, and Nick Merriweather was instrumental in getting it. Nick's now with the Psychedelic Museum, I believe, And they're starting to pop up other collections of Grateful Dead archives at universities. I know Rebecca's working on some for North Carolina, in Greensboro, and there's talk of one in Wisconsin. And so there's not going to be just one, and that may happen with Phish too, that there's multiple places that hold these archives. Selfishly, I would love to see Oregon State University hold those archives because of the work that Stephanie's done, and also because of the link that we have to the Grammys here and a program with the Grammys, and because of all the great work at Prax. I think OSU would be a wonderful archive place for Phish. But yeah, it's a matter of getting involved with the band, but they don't have to be completely involved, and it had to be all of them, and it depends on how the band works, right? The Dead's practices were very traditional organization, yeah. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So, great discussion. As you're going through the challenges, I'm reminded of my start in technical publishing, where we said, oh, you mean printing user manuals? Like, no, printing books about technology. That's stupid. Nobody's ever going to use that stuff. That was almost 40 years ago. And it took a few anchor tenants to show that this was a discipline. Publishers historically are horrible laggards, right? They'll go if they think there's money there, but they're going to wait for someone else to go show them the money. Again, I think, Oren, I think your book is, one of the things. But one of the ways that market grows, and I was struck by something Stephanie said, that you cite each other. How do you get people outside of this brilliant community to cite your work so it gets visible? And then the publishers will see a market. I think there's this problem of, all the smart people know all the smart people, but how do you get the people who also understand this is a discipline, it is real academic research? Subtract the word Phish, put in any other thing, and you're talking about, philosophy, art, culture, business models, and there's scholarly research there. How do you grow the citation network? I mean to put you on the spot. I was just
Well, I can say for the Public Philosophy Journal, that's the reason why we required an outside philosophy academic to be reading and reviewing the works so that it would be relevant outside of the field of Phish studies. I can't tell you the extent to which those articles have been cited outside of philosophy yet, but that was the goal.
So one of the ideas that could help with this, we want to compile a bibliography, a very extensive bibliography that is housed somewhere online, like the spreadsheet is just there for everyone, that has sections on, here are all the dissertations that are either about Phish or are linked to Phish. Here are all the peer-reviewed journal articles. Here are all the edited volumes. Here are all the monographs. And slowly but surely, we build that repository over time, and there's a central place for it. But also, if these are publications in academic presses or academic journals, anyone who does a JSTOR search or a Google Scholar search or whatever your database is for searching, if it is in there, you can find it. So it's also, this is really strange, but it's really important what you title your paper in terms of searchability, what the keywords are that you use, and that is a very strategic choice to get people to find your work, even if they're not looking for, what did somebody write about Phish and Jewish identity? No, like that, it has to be much bigger, bigger than that.
I would also just add to that what we were talking about earlier, which is, Phish is a case study, right? And so the way to draw attention to your work is publish in your field, in your area, right? I study musical speech communities, musical communication communities, and dispersed communities. And that's what draws people to it. They're not coming and looking necessarily for my work on deadheads or fish fans, but they're looking for work on these keywords, these things that are important in the conversations we're having in our disciplines. And so, and that's one way to, get people to learn about your work, to build respect for our field of study, that sort of thing. And so the keywords are so important. And they're generally not going to be fish. That's not going to be the word, right? It's your subject that you are studying, right?
I'll also add that both in terms of how to develop your own scholarship, but also how to publish and how to get ourselves out there, it's the tired and cliche but still true phrase of thinking outside the box. So for example, my own dissertation work, when there wasn't anything published on Phish yet, I had to, okay, so what do I want to say about this, or what's central to understand about Phish? So improvisation was one of them. And I schooled myself, I found all I could find, not all, but a good deal of things written on improvisation that did not touch Phish at all, right? To help me kind of wrap my brain around improvisation so I could then make the case about how improvisation is so amazing and important in the Phish phenomenon, right? So think about, and it can be, don't be afraid to play in other sandboxes, so to speak. Don't be afraid to look at scholarship from other disciplines that you can then use to help you understand, unpack, analyze, say things about Phish. So you can play out, it doesn't have to deal with Phish, it doesn't have to be your own discipline, and this also applies to publishing, right? So if you can find journals that aren't necessarily your field or don't deal with music or Phish at all, but you can find a different way in, and again, special issues can be a great way to do this. It's thinking about kind of those sideways ways to get there that get you published and also get you seen, right? Or help you develop and think through your own scholarship.
Hi, thank you all. I'm going to address this to Oren, but it's really for all of you. One of my favorite parts about writing a chapter for the volume you edited was going through the editing process with you. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the craft of that process, as well as some of the challenges in doing it for an interdisciplinary anthology, and especially maybe some of those that are unique to Phish, as well as hear from the other panelists on their editing process.
First of all, thank you for writing a chapter. It's so good.
I hope I was consistent in my song references. Citations.
And go see Noah's presentation right after this panel. The primary challenge in editing this book was twofold. One is we wanted to have a book that was scholarly and erudite and rigorous, but also accessible to a non-academic audience. That is a very challenging balance to strike. Number two, we were doing this with some people who have an academic background in scholarly writing and some who do not. Those two challenges, sort of navigating that, was very hard, but also very fun. So we had a lot of chapters, and we would go through them one by one, look at them both individually, but also thinking about it within the context of a broader project. How do these fit together? How do we put them together? If everyone is saying the same thing about their experience with seeing Avinu Malkeinu, then how do we get certain authors to write about that in a different way, or to say something different about it? So the process was to go through each one individually and then revise again and then revise again, but not just send it back. Like if you're peer reviewing a journal article, revise and resubmit, you never get to talk to the person who says revise and resubmit. We would spend time on the phone or on Zoom, and we would talk about it, and we would walk through what we wanted to do to get the chapters to be ready. And that's where it was fun. Like, we would be on Zoom together and we would be shooting the shit about our Phish experiences and this and that, but also talking about, here's how we need this to be articulated. Here's the words you could use. Here's how to tell that story. So that was very, very fun. Yeah. One last thing. It's also really great to have a partner and not to do it alone. Ariella, the co-editor, and I, we were actually, we went to undergrad together. We were religious studies majors at Skidmore College together. Skidmore, shout out, here we go. And so we had this really long-standing relationship that made it very, very easy for us to work with, but it's so much harder to do alone. Find yourself a friend.
So we also experienced the challenge of wanting to reach a scholarly audience, but also having it accessible to the fan audience. So we adopted the accessibility, relevance, intellectual coherence, and scholarly dialogue criteria from the PPJ, and used that when we went through and edited the essays. We're a team of 3, so we divided up the essays and had each essay was read by 2 of us. And we divided them up by area of expertise. There were some essays that we didn't feel fully competent to read on our own. For example, there were a couple essays that relied heavily on statistics that we brought in some outside folks to give some perspective on to make sure that they were fully up to our standards. And we also have some folks outside of academia who are working on the essay who needed some kind of guidance along the way about how to edit an academic essay. It's been a fun process. Some of the challenges along the way have been life, like a pandemic, and various things that have popped up along the way. So the book is coming along. It's been taking a little bit longer than we would like, but it's going to be out in the near future. Editing work is hard because it's very detail oriented. It takes a lot of time, but it's worth it because it ultimately, that back and forth with the authors, it results in a better product in the end.
I'll add one quick thing, and I think we probably all understand this, but it's good to make this explicit. The interesting challenge, but also opportunity with studying Phish is that you've got a fan community. That's this fan community, right? Rabid, devout, generally thinkers and geeky, even if they don't think of themselves as academics at all. So like, think about them, and I think this is part of what that special issue is doing, right? Like, this is not just for scholars. And I think this is gonna be our ongoing challenge and question here with Phish Studies is to help people understand that this is, even if you don't think of yourself as an academic, if you're a Phish fan, you will find stuff that's interesting here. But one of the main things that I want to get at, which is again really obvious, but I want to make explicit, and it relates to talking to potential publishers, you probably, and maybe Oren, you can talk about if you talked about this with them. When you talk to a publisher, you can tell them like, yeah, we'll sell this book to libraries at institutions across the country, all the kind of regular ways that sales and book and copies are going to move, but then you can also tell the publisher, look, there's a good chance that Phish fans, if they come across this, or if you market this well enough, so there's a wider market for Phish publications, at least books, that publishers might go, oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting, right? There's more people interested in reading a book that are not academic, outside the academic world, and that's built in with the Phish fan community to some extent.
100% that's the case. I remember there's a line that I wrote in our book proposal in the marketing section that says, Phish fans have a voracious appetite for all things Phish. And that is a marketing plan in and of itself, that if Phish fans know about this, they will be interested. And there's a lot of us, and the book sells.
And for that reason, I think we as scholars have a responsibility for our scholarship to be accessible when we're writing it, because our work is possible because of the community, so we should make it accessible to the community. That doesn't mean we watered down the work that we're doing. It just means that if we can avoid jargon when possible, that we do so.
Just to follow up on that, can you talk a little bit more about what you think rigorous scholarship has to offer, not only academia outside of Phish Studies, but the Phish community outside of academia?
Phish fans are scholars in our own way, whether they're outside of academia or not. We track statistics, we explore in-depth knowledge of the band, we track our shows. We're all scholars, right? Just and theorists in our own way. And so a friend who's here at this conference, who's been following Phish for decades, had said that she thought that she had learned everything that she could about Phish. And then when she came to the conference, realized that there was this whole other world to Phish that she had never seen before, right? It's a prism. And so we find new ways of exploring Phish, and we do it together. And so that's what Phish Studies has to offer fans.
Wonderfully put, thank you.
I'll add one thing real quick regarding the jargon part of it. I want to reframe that a tiny bit. It's not so much avoid jargon, but don't use it in a way that's inaccessible, right? So like there's jargon, and theorists and academics come up with terms, concepts, theories, right? Typologies, all these things that sound really heady and inaccessible. And I tell my students, it's like there's a reason for it. What does this do for you? How does this help you unlock or understand whatever it might be, right? So don't be afraid to use at least some jargon, but you have to help your reader and think of the wider fan community, like dig it and appreciate, like, oh, so this isn't just some random heady thing that's super ivory tower and pushes me away. This is something that helps me. And so help them understand and appreciate that.
I want to say that it also works the other way, that fans and Phish scholars also help. I'll tell a personal story. Me, as a Phish fan and as a Phish scholar. So I understood the relationship between theory and practice in a way that I never did before doing this book. And here's what happened. So I guess this book is a pandemic project. It sucked. There was no live music. There was no Phish. It was terrible. And spend my time reading these chapters, editing again and again and again. And I keep reading. Collective effervescence, communitas, Durkheim this. And I'm like, great, the theory, that's amazing, awesome. Reading all about Avinu Malkeinu and the experiences that people have. Some people, this is a big thing for Jewish fans, talking about Avinu Malkeinu, who's seen it, when, how many times. I'd never, Ariella, co-editor, saw it at her first show, and that's like, what? Oh, this is amazing, this is for me. I had never seen them play Avinu Malkeinu before, and I got to the point where I was like, I'm probably never going to see them play Avinu Malkeinu, and that's all good, whatever, it's fine. First, the Shoreline, I think it was 2021, the shows that were supposed to be in Tahoe that moved to Shoreline. It was the first time I'm seeing Phish again, and going through this project, all I'd been doing, thinking again, theory. And then they played Avinu Malkeinu. And I had this moment of like, collective effervescence. Communitas. That's what this is. And I was able to understand the relationship between theory and practice on a deep personal level in a way that I had never before, even after 17 years of being in academic circles or whatever. So it really works in all kinds of ways, scholars to fans, fans to scholars, and in a very circular way.
Do we have another question? Thank you.
That is exactly my experience as well with my work with Phish and Affect. It's like performed every time. first of all, I want to say thank y'all deeply for both making inroads to Phish Studies and helping us get to this point, and also providing the space for us to share our ideas, but also to exemplify, model, and perform what it means to do like true, rigorous interdisciplinary scholarship, which I think anything in Phish Studies is necessarily interdisciplinary. So thank y'all for that. My question comes out of my dissertation process itself, which I'm in the music world, specifically music theory. And one of the things that I've noticed in music studies is that, like, Phish Studies is totally being accepted. We've gotten some major publications, like literally the same article has like a Beethoven and Phish, like you turn the page and it's right there and you're like, holy smokes. Not that I think they should be canonized like that, but at the same time, it's really cool to see it getting to that level of awareness, right? And that kind of level of like scholarly inquiry. But one of the things I was really challenged by in my dissertation process was the fact that my advisors were really adamant about me critiquing Phish and me critiquing the scene. And I'm wondering what y'all think about that and where critique lies in Phish Studies and its importance, both as a reflection of our own fans, so we're not doing the thing where it's like, Phish is the greatest band in the world, let me show you why, and then just throwing a bunch of theories at it to basically support the fact that you think they're great, which is, I think, an irresponsible thing to do. But like, so that first with this kind of reflexive process, but then also like, what does it mean to critique the scene as a fan, and how might that be situated in also showing other people outside the community what it's about, right? Because like, we can't just be like, Phish is great, let me just do all of these things that support these other theories without ever getting into this process of self-reflection and saying like I'm thinking like White Fragility, that article, you know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. Where do you think, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that level, but like, where do you think critique lies in its place?
I'll say this, early on and throughout my process of writing the dissertation, I wrestled with this a lot and talked about this with my dissertation advisor. And I think of critique and celebration kind of being the other side of the coin, but I wrestle with this, and talking with my dissertation advisor, I erred on the side of celebration. I wanted to do that. And critique, through that, critique and celebration are not mutually exclusive. There's a difference between saying, oh my God, Phish is awesome, or saying like, Phish is a really interesting, rich phenomenon. There's a lot to unpack and understand and critically think through, and critical concepts or critical thinking concepts and in the process still celebrate, which is not to say there's not a lot of things to, critically look at and be self-aware of, all the work that our affinity groups are doing, Group Safe and all the others, Free and so forth. So there's a lot of that needs to be critiqued, and a lot of ways that the scene needs to be better and so forth, right? But I resist the notion that celebratory scholarship isn't critical or isn't smart, or that, talking about Phish as being fantastic is like somehow not rigorous scholarship.
I'll add to that, I'm sorry to keep bringing up the dead studies, but we went through a lot of these growing pains exactly in this manner. And, after years, I think my first presentation was in 1998 with that caucus, and it was people, after about 20 years, we started looking around and asking ourselves, like, where's the dark side? There is a dark side to the whole Grateful Dead scene, and it's a very male-dominated scene, and it's a very white scene, and and of course we all find joy in it. That's why we're there. We have meaning, that sort of thing. But we also have had experiences and challenges that we need to talk about that are part of our world. Now, I agree with Jnan. I don't think we go out there just to critique, but if that is in your discipline and that is something that you can do, it is definitely important to show that we recognize that, right? That we recognize this is not an ideal, right? So again, not to just critique it, but use your theories to inform that critique, and critique is not always negative, right? But I can see your dissertation chair. I mean, my chair wouldn't let me publish. I wouldn't let me write my dissertation on the Grateful Dead. And it wasn't that he wouldn't let me, he didn't want me to, and I wanted to study with him, so I chose another subject, you know, and then came back to it. But yeah, that I think as an outsider, that push for critique is different than what we think as academics critique is about. But yeah, we should talk about the dark sides, yeah, when they're relevant.
Maybe another way to think about this too is taking all of the now growing body of Phish studies, of Phish-related scholarship, thinking about it in concert, being clear about how you fit into that. So maybe me and this particular, any one of us in whatever writing we're doing, I'm celebrating more than critiquing, or, you know, focusing on the wonderful, amazing, super interesting things that are happening there and developing that in a rigorous way, but always at least pointing to the fact that there are these problems, there is the dark side, and acknowledging, I'm such a believer in the writing, acknowledging what you're not doing, and at least nodding to that. So saying, here's what I'm doing, and here's what I'm attempting to do, and here's what I'm not doing, or here's the work that remains to be done, and pointing to it, and this is where we can cite each other, whether it's the scholarship or these groups, where there is this work to do. So kind of thinking about your own work in the wider context of the whole thing, right? And where you fit in, and are you doing this more than this, and being clear on that, and then making that explicit in your scholarship.
I think it's argument dependent in the context of your dissertation, but I'm always of the position that if you're in a position of power and you're able to make a critique, that it's a good idea.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. Oh, Oren, you want to add something?
Oh, I just want to offer one maybe final reflection of this panel in sort of relationship to celebratory scholarship. I have another book project that I find very meaningful and important, but it's not a fun topic. It's not a fun thing to think about. Writing about Phish is so fucking fun. And it should be so fun. And the projects that I hope will all, or many of us will undertake, having to do with Phish Studies, should be a even if we're critiquing it, it should be a celebration of an incredibly fun moment in time in our lives that is finite and we should hold on to. And learning should be fun. Producing scholarship can be fun. And we can celebrate and critique and have a really good time. I mean, can we still have any fun? Like, it should be fun.